Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again one of Macon's leading intellectuals and general savants, Dr. Buck Melton. Buck, welcome. Nice to be with us tonight.
Well, I'm glad to be here, but I always have to do the double take when you start talking about me being a savant. I wonder if I'm one of the best we've got, then our town is in great trouble.
Well, I think you've made the point.
Thank you.
I think you made a point. Well, moving past that, I know, for both of us, with the political season is upon us, the electoral cycle is out there, and it certainly has the feeling of being a fire dog in the fire station, listening to the fire trucks go by, maybe. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Do we have to?
Well, we're going to be very restrained.
Yes,
I promise to be restrained, but. It really is impressive, I think, to both of us to see the advertisements, to see what's happening with our political process, and the role that advertising plays, the role money plays. Can voters make a true choice? The other issue out there is it seems like a number of candidates have appeared or occupy a political office, shall we say, who have substantial, to a casual observer, intellectual problems, either post-stroke or possibly the results of earlier operations. I'll let it go at that. And additionally, there appears to be a lot of, I would say, mental illness that's overt and covert that are in the people that are seeking political office. Additionally, if you took the people they deal with, let's say in some big high-powered law firms or big capitalist, or as far as that goes, people in the diplomatic corps, people that they would have dealings with, a casual observer would think they depend enormously on their advisors, and you could even use the word handlers to get them across the finish line. Are the voters aware of this, and do you have some comments on this issue where it appears the voters are electing people with substantial seeming defects that will be rectified by their party affiliation that will just more or less tell them how to vote, thus a voter on the streets in Macon, if they vote for candidate A or candidate B, despite that candidate's shortfallings, will believe that the party structure will put their wishes will bring their wishes to fruition. Well, you have any comments on these issues?
Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought and of late, and I would add to that perhaps severe moral deficits as well, which might or might not be connected to some sort of organic mental problems that they may have. And the thing I've been pondering is there are really sort of two directions you can take the idea of representation. And I guess the two that I would pick out from history, because they, I think, enunciated it so well and that they happened at the same time, were William Jennings Bryan,
who was of Gold.
Yes, the Cross of Gold, the Democratic populist favorite from the late 1800s, early 1900s.
And the agrarian favorite.
Yes.
Which is always a big watershed.
Yes.
Urban versus rural.
Yes. And Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt's approach, and I think this is more or less a quotation, he said, public office is a public trust. When you elect me, you're not just electing a mouthpiece of the voter. You are electing my judgment, you're electing my experience, for lack of a better word, wisdom. And so you're counting on me not just to vote reflexively or toe a party line, but to exercise some independent judgment about what's the best way to handle this authority in order to give the people what, and this is me talking, not Roosevelt, but give the people what they need rather than what they want.
It's always a slippery slope.
Yes.
That's extremely slippery.
Yes. And that quotation is from another quasi-politician, Louis Brandeis, who ended up on the Supreme Court, who said that about the same time. I give the client what he needs, not what he wants. The opposite of that would be Bryan, and of course one of the big issues that Bryan faced was, should we back paper money with gold, or should we back it with gold and silver?
Just 16 to 1.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So somebody asked him where he stood on the issue of silver. And he said, silver? I don't know anything about silver. The people are for silver, and therefore so am I.
Yes.
I will look up the arguments later.
Yes.
And so that's the mouthpiece.
Yes.
You simply are you do what the people who put you there want you to do.
Yes.
So I've been listening to a lot of pundits, a lot of talk shows, a lot of call-ins, and there's this idea that I think that's being really prevalent right now, and perhaps that comes down, it's a result of distrust in the political system and distrust in our elected representatives, that we don't care if he's got mental deficits, we don't care if he's got severe moral problems, as long as he's going to vote the way we want him to vote, then that's what matters.
Yes.
And that's an interesting take on things.
Well, let me go at it slightly as a different way, but firstly, the people that become politicians. I mean, let's see, who is it? They're waiting to, I'll stay at home and people can force me into the realm of power. They can come get me and force me. They've recognized my great merit and they'll do that. That's pretty unusual. In fact, it's almost unheard of. So really, people have to pursue a political career, and it's a real career, isn't it? So people they do this, they work at it. It's a very vexing career choice. There are lots of ups and downs. There's tremendous family stress, whatever, and it looks like as they do this, the major objective is sort of only incidentally what the people want or need, only incidentally, but the real deal is their personal needs and wants. So their needs and wants are to stay elected, stay in power a substantial period of time, and that has its own gratifications. But at the end of the road, there's a substantial cornucopia of wealth awaits them, which is not publicized. I mean, it really is pretty extraordinary to me that in some countries, what happens when you enter political office, an accountant looks over your resources and, well, you've got $1 million or whatever you have. And then at the end of your term in office, they take a look at it again. Well, your numbers are pretty much the same. And off you go. Well, there's almost no inquiry along those lines. And the number of politicians that go on boards of places that they've or organizations they've looked after while they've been in power, they get positions under well-paid positions later, working for the same organizations they presumably looked after. And the other thing that happens is that once you're in there, and say you're in Washington, and you learn all kinds of things that are happening, and it's possible to make a lot of money, not only for you but also for your relatives. Another thing that happens when people run for office is, you may notice, there are tremendous amounts of funds that are raised, and presumably, that's my understanding on this, that about 10% of the money that you contribute to a political campaign goes into the coffers of the politician's organization, which is certainly leaves substantial possibilities for sort of pseudo-corruption. The money is there. Their relatives can go on, well, I'm going to pay my mother-in-law $100,000 to be a consultant, and somehow the money can be recycled later. So there's a tremendous amount of funds that wind up in the politician's hands. And the way the game is, it's almost a game where in some ways the voters are sort of secondary, and they have tremendously wise manipulators of public opinion that look after, as it's been said, elections are determined by about 5% of the population. Everyone else kind of knows what they're going to do. It's voter turnout, your quote, ground game, how you get people to vote, and getting that 5% that's in the middle. So it's kind of an art, kind of a science. And that when you become a politician, these noble, the noble quotes that you mentioned from Teddy Roosevelt and William Jennings Bryan, it's true enough that's in the hopper. I don't doubt that it's there. But these other factors certainly surface. And I'll make one comment here and then toss the football back to you. Here's a pass. But one of the things that happens in this process is the voters determine, who am I going to vote for? What's going to happen? What do I want to do? Well, firstly, there's an enormous amount of sophistry. So these sort of pseudoscientists that are trying to capture your vote they have access to macro data. So they can say, well, this person loves cats. And they've got lots, it takes Cats magazine. We've able to see this particular person spends, I don't know, $100 a month on cat food and whatever the cats require and vet bills. So we're going to send letters to this person saying, candidate X just loves cats. Here's a picture of him with his 4 cats or her 4 cats. And sort of influence a person on the basis of their cat allegiance, if I can phrase it that way. Which you could say, well, I really care so much about cats that all other issues are secondary. And so what you want and what you need is another matter. So if what you want is someone to care about cats, that's sort of who that would be who the politician, I think, would tilt toward. I'm going to try and pretend I'm fulfilling the voters' wants, who are often just humans being what they are, or it could certainly be out there in left field in strange ways, or maybe not so much, but there can certainly be opinions that you would wonder, is this going to direct the nature of our species, the particular small group of people that often determine elections? And if you actually wanted to say, I'm going to run on what the voter needs, as opposed to what he wants, then I don't believe you could easily be elected these days. Which begs the question: what if a voter is going to determine our whole nature of our world? Is the mechanism by which he or she obtains information appropriate? So it appears to me that let's see, there are many issues that a voter that wishes the welfare of the world to happen, that voter would want to know this or want to know that or want to know this. And actually getting these important pieces of information is difficult. And now, can you comment on that? I mean, what's going on with the media? What does a voter hear? And what he or she hears is going to determine which way that the voter votes.
Well, yeah, I can comment on it. I do think we're talking about 2 discrete issues here, or 2 issues that perhaps are not extremely closely related. One is the question that you've just recently raised, is how you market yourself as a candidate in such a way as to do the most you can to get the vote that you're going to need to get into office, and then be able to do whatever it is you want to do or whatever it is you can do once you're in office. The other one, the one that I was addressing earlier, is from the perspective of the voter, to what degree am I turned off by the idea that this potential candidate's going to exercise independent judgment? And to the second question, I think that given the degree of political polarization in our country now, it's very hard to meet in the middle. And so most voters really are going to say, I don't care about any shortcomings this candidate has, as long as he or she is able to keep breathing and to vote the way my party wants the candidate to vote. Now, as to your question, if you can get enough hooks in these people by very precisely targeted advertisements or media campaigns or whatever, then yeah, that's going to get you into office. And then if you want to extend that a little bit, once you're in office, you can pretty much do what you want, as long as the voter is fairly ignorant of the ins and outs of whatever political deals are being made and what you're actually doing. So, it is possible, and I would argue that it is more possible today than ever before, and I'm thinking specifically of Congress or a legislator. It's more possible today than ever before to know what your elected representative is doing if you take the time and commit the resources to doing it. That you can look up instantly who has sponsored what bill, who has voted for what bill, what your person's been doing on the record in committee. Now, of course, not everything takes place on the record, the cloakroom deals and that sort of thing. But I would say it's much more transparent than ever before. But it's so much easier just to listen to the information that's being pushed by the candidate or by the actual elected representative now, or that is being pushed by the party behind that candidate or by the news outlets that tend to ideologically favor that representative's party. And so the information that's going to be pushed will drown out whatever you might want to do on your own, and whatever research you might want to conduct. And once again, if you're highly partisan anyway and living in the echo chamber, you're going to be fine with that.
Well, I mean, it's a lot, to use your phrase, to unpack here, to parse out these issues in our complicated world, our complicated political process, which seems to be evolving, I would say. It does look like we're wedded to a two-party system. And within those parties, they struggle, they go back and forth. And the people that are in the matrices of these parties are there for a variety of reasons, not all of them noble, as I tried to point out. And the poor voter is just sitting there without the time or resources to really, who can look at who voted for what in Washington? Who can do that? So there's a dependence on some kind of neutral purveyor of information as to what really is going on. And maybe that's where I'm trying to sail the ship a little bit. Are there neutral purveyors of information that the voters can trust to go through and just pick out the issues of consequence and without all the froth and say seems to be what the issue is? And this is an important issue. So, for instance, we could say, and I think we could agree on this, the national debt is just an extraordinary problem, and the politicians are doing nothing about it. And the inflation, the only thing that seems to have stirred people up a little bit is the inflation number, which finally struck home. But not to put too fine a point on it, this is a big deal as to what's going on, how are we going to manage that, the voters are feeling the inflation issue. Well, like the song goes, you ain't seen nothing yet. If, in fact, the extraordinary debt that the U.S. has, and indeed the world has, cannot appropriately be dealt with, then these terrible financial crises that just strike us unawares could really be an issue of consequence. But in this electoral cycle, as far as I know, almost no one has mentioned that. And one of the important things, I think, is that the interest on the national debt has increased so much because of the Federal Reserve attempting to rein in inflation. The mechanism by which they do that are increasing interest rates. And the national debt's interest rates, as they go up, I mean, it becomes unsustainable. And the amount of money the country requires to maintain social peace, income redistribution, entitlements, defense policies, defeat the Chinese, whatever the numbers are, this is really quite a substantial problem. Instead, if you listen to what's going on, there may be, I don't know, some scandal will appear from somewhere, or some person may have said something or whatever, and they'll just, that's what's being discussed. I think I've heard almost no discussion about that. Let's see, quote, climate change. That's a very complicated story about what's really going on, what's the deal with methane, is the policy that's been undertaken to suppress carbon emissions? What is that actually going to cost? And then what happens if China and India don't do anything? Can we do the whole arrangement? Does it require some kind of worldwide arrangement? How are we going to solve these problems? And that doesn't seem to be what's out there, as that's an understatement.
Yes.
And I finally say this, I suggest that C-SPAN is a wonderful neutral purveyor of facts. We need more of that to just at least get something out in front of the voters. I'll throw it to you.
Well, you've added now two more big issues on top of the ones that we've already talked.
Yes.
So I think our first issue was what are people looking for in a voter. The second issue that you then added was, is the potential voter really getting the whole story from the candidate? The third issue you've now added is, even if the voter can get the story from the candidate, is the candidate addressing the issues that really matter? And number four, you're edging into a basic epistemological question of can we really know the truth about anything? So, yeah, doom and gloom.
Okay, we can parse that causality. We can get it, but let's avoid that for our readers' sake.
Yeah. So I'll go back and I'll say,
Readers' sake, yes.
I will say once again, I think it is honestly easier if you're a conscientious person who is really interested in public affairs. And that may be a big if. I mean, there are obviously a huge bunch of casual voters out there who are reflexive, and they're just always going to vote Democrat and then quit paying attention, or always vote Republican.
A preponderant number of them.
But if you're truly interested in tracking your representative's position, and once again, if we're talking about Congress, you only have to track the position of 3 people, not 535 people. You have to track the positions and records of your 2 senators and your district's representatives. So that makes it a little bit easier. You can set up easily a web crawler or any sort of device that can actually scan the web on a regular basis. And so, if you're interested in Raphael Warnock, for instance, you can type in his name and it will spit out news articles from various news sources about anything that his name is tagged with. Now, once again, the question is, are these news sources going to be biased? You mentioned C-SPAN. I'll mention another one, allsides.com, which is, I think, a really great news source because it's an aggregator that aggregates from dozens and dozens of news sources, and it tells you the bias of each one of its news sources. And it will often run 3 articles on the same subject simultaneously, one from the right, one from the center, and one from the left, as rated by the readers of all sides. So, can that be manipulated? Of course, but once again, the epistemological question, at some point, you've got to trust a news source somewhere. So if you're truly interested in getting a neutral view of the news and what's happening, then getting your sources or getting your news from separate sources and playing them off against each other is about the best we can do. I will say, as an aside here about the national debt, the last personal memory I have of any quasi-serious discussion of the national debt by our elected politicians was during the Reagan presidency. And the Democrats, rather hypocritically in retrospect, were arguing that Reagan had added more to the national debt than all previous U.S. presidents combined. I think it's hypocritical for a couple of reasons, because first of all, Reagan couldn't do that by himself. He needed a Congress to help him with that. And secondly, if they were really concerned about the national debt and instead of being concerned about a Republican in the White House, then why haven't they said it? That was $2 or $3 trillion debt. We have a national debt now that is literally 10 times that, not adjusting for inflation. Crickets.
Yes.
So.
Well, there's a lot to unpack once again there. I think there were 4 things you noted I went into, but I won't pick them ad seriatim fashion. However, the question is out there is the problem with a representative democracy, or republic, shall we say, is that the voters themselves cannot actually know everything. They can't parse things out. A web crawler, that sounds rather frightening to me, but I don't know. I'm happy you know about web crawlers, but I'm afraid I don't. But there are people, many that do probably.
Yeah, they're almost ridiculously easy to set up these days.
So, all right, okay, I like that.
I could have you
like
setting up
that,
an
a web crawler.
I can let you set up an aggregator within 15 minutes.
I like the name has a certain je ne sais quoi to it. But having said that, so we're dependent on intermediaries to parse the truth out for us. And I'm happy to the ones you quoted. I'm not sure how many appropriate intermediaries there are. Now, the government has attempted, I think the Democratic administration, they were trying to put some kind of truth commission on board. So the government was going to tell you what was true or not, and indeed, the internet, the people that run the internet, that have mechanisms presumably to take out untruth, which is quite a task. So we could just go a little bit into what's true and what's not. It is really, really hard to do that. The complexities of it are big. You can go back and forth. We get into causality. Climate change, is that simple? I mean, what about the spin of the Earth? What about sunspots? What about some vagaries of comets passing through the solar system? All these many, many things are there that have an impact on everything. So it's really hard to ever say what truth is. And I think the issue is that what happens is if a person has a legitimate argument on a subject, that I think that person needs access to the media to present the argument. I think the problem that happens is the ad hominem attacks that are out there, and a certain level of civility and politeness would be needed. I don't particularly think that's that is the barrier that the media and the government are attempting to correct. Not out. They were not so worried, I don't think, about these ad hominem attacks. Although that was, they were certainly wouldn't like it. But the arguments to say I'm against your plan for carbon capture. I don't think that's the deal. And I look at these are my arguments for it. That would be politely stated. Now, we certainly should have access to that. And I think the problem is the government would be in the position to suppress that. And there are lots of limitations. We've talked about this before on pursuing the truth, and particularly as that's relevant in our political situation. It does seem like in the election in Georgia, I mean, just looking at our state here, there are the ad hominem attacks and the general sense of establishing a relationship with your supporters, where your supporters can get the joy of you slashing your communal enemy, almost like a contest in the Coliseum. So the people are screaming and yelling. It's very purgative, and it's enormous brain endorphin release. If you're watching football games, it's a similar kind of thing. So yes. I mean, I don't want to blunder too much into this, but the way the brain is structured has a role in how our political system works, and that needs to be considered. And I think what we see in all of these interchanges, where the voters are attempting to persuade voters to support a particular candidate, is that enters into it, and it's not as if it's a mutual truth seeking. I think that's the problem. That's what I'd like to see more of, or at least have some apparatus where that occurs. And if in the voter manipulation, I'll finally make that comment, that's pretty extraordinary. And if you watch a debate, or just neutrally sit there and see what happened, and the commentators then tell you what to think about it, it's pretty impressive. You've heard what you saw, and this would be this is, what do you think happened? This is what happened. And the commentators come in, and it's kind of like 1984. They say, you didn't really see that.
Yes.
That didn't really happen. This is what really happened. Your eyes and ears lied to you, and you have to trust us. We're the purveyors of truth, and so you have to trust us. And so that's a bad way to go, I think.
Well, I think this, as we're starting to wind down here, this sort of brings us back full circle. And once again, I'd argue it is harder now than ever before for the commentator to do that, unless you are dealing with somebody who is, how to say it, willfully stupid. I mean, who has drunk the Kool-Aid of whatever party.
Well, I think they attempt to.
Yeah, well, they certainly attempt to. I'll give you that. But it's harder than ever before with cameras and mics everywhere to serve as filters. But it brings us back to the ad hominem attacks, and we are certainly seeing those in Georgia in the Senate race. But this is one of the highest profile races in the country, and it comes right back to the party faithful saying, I don't care if my candidate is an axe murderer, so long as he gets there and votes the way my party wants to vote.
Whether he's able to tie his shoes or is able to push him in a wheelchair or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw the same sort of thing in the Pennsylvania Senate race the other night when you had not Oz, but the other candidate whose name is slipping my mind right now, but he supposedly had a stroke in May and was just freezing up during the debate. And once again, I don't care if he's a stroke victim as long as he is able to push the button to vote the way that we want.
If his assistant can push his...
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, I mean, you could make the case a certain high public official in Washington has substantial, I think we can assert that there's some cognitive problems with this high political official.
I know the official to whom you refer, and I think that he is by no means alone. If you look up the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, that members of both parties who are losing.
Absolutely, and so one of the things, I mean, this is absolutely true, the number of demented elderly politicians that are there that are kept, their supporters want them in that seat, whether or not they can they know where they are or not, just as long as they can be persuaded to push the button the way they
precisely.
Want. And the question comes up, who is it that's telling them to push the button, and what is, if we're going through the deal about the way things work, and I think we have asserted, the voters are kept some distance, I think, from what's going on a little bit. And we're also making the case that there's a lot of self-interest involved in the political system, a tremendous amount of self-interest.
Of course.
A huge amount, the voters, and so there's almost this fantasy, Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of thing, that's not too much in evidence.
The number of political advertisements I've heard over the decades saying, Washington is broken, we need to fix it, elect candidate X.
Who wants to get up there and have a role at the trough, so to speak. He wants his or her turn at the trough.
Yes.
Well, it's not exactly a happy story, but I think the country will blunder through it as they always do. It is a particularly dangerous time for our species, I think, and the requirements of the political system are going to be more than in the past. That would be my thought about it. It can't be sort of a rope-a-dope kind of issue about putting where the roads go or whatever, or some kind of arcane law that's going out there, whether or not dogs should be on leases or, I don't know, something like that. But there are big things out there with our 8 billion people, with these terrible tensions, economic crisis, war, plague, famine in some places, death is coming.
Well, I think that the only remedy for the political system, and once again, this is the advice that my late mentor Jim Cox here of Mercer's Political Science Department, only recently passed away, but he would always say, think for yourself, because if you don't, someone else will think for you.
Yes.
I think today, for the person who wishes to follow that injunction, it is easier to think for oneself and inform oneself than ever before. I truly believe that. But it's also easier just to let the system do the thinking for you, and that's the danger.
Yes.
Thinking for oneself is always hard. It's easier now than ever before, but perhaps it's also easier just to be completely unreflective and live in your echo chamber.
Well, thank you, Bucky. We've had an interesting interchange tonight. We've probed a number of pressing issues, and we look forward to talking to you again. So thank you, whatever our thing is. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.